Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our Virtual Learning Academy presentation this morning. Lauren is here from ODNR, Maumee Bay State Park, and she will be discussing the Warblers of Ohio with us today. Thank you so much, Lauren, for doing this program for us.
Absolutely. I'm very excited. 'Tis the season for warblers. We're at the beginning of our neotropical migrant season. So all of these birds are coming in right now from all the way down from South America, Central America, and Mexico, and they are migrating up here. It is very birdy and very warbly over here. I'm at Maumee Bay State Park. If you guys haven't been up, I'm a little bit east of Toledo, and we have a 2-mile boardwalk that has some amazing birding opportunities. Not just warblers, we have lots of wading birds and all that jazz. So please come up. The McGee Marsh right now is under restrictions. You have to get a reservation, but Maumee Bay, we don't have one. So we actually have 3 separate entrances so we can accommodate more people. So if you're interested in birds, please come up here and visit and walk that boardwalk. But without further ado, we're going to be talking about the Warblers of Ohio, and there are a lot. Just a heads up, this presentation is pretty long, but it's a lot of pretty pictures. And if you do have questions, please feel free to interrupt me. No problem. I'll be happy to answer them. So we're going to be hitting mostly the common warblers of Ohio. We have 38 species that breed in North America and in Eastern North America. There's more than that, but you can find about 38 species in Eastern, and 37 of them can regularly find in Ohio, which is pretty neat. We have a pretty good number that nest here in Ohio, about 25. And the problem is they're a little bit hard to identify because of their behavior. They're small, they're fast, and they like to forage, a lot of them high up in trees. So you get this bird or neck when you're looking up and trying to identify these birds, and you're usually looking at their tails, their behinds, rather than their lovely side profiles. So they can be a little bit of a challenge sometimes to identify. But today we're going to break down the basics of Warbler ID. Some of it looks complicated, but we'll break it down and kind of give you an idea of what warblers you're most likely to see. So migration, I did mention that these guys are neotropical. So from South America all the way up, and a lot of them breed as far north as Canada. So it is a very long journey that these birds are taking. And in the springtime, it's extra tough because they have to maintain basically breeding condition. So they have these vibrant, lovely colors, but the problem is it takes a lot of energy to maintain these colors. So it's quite the journey for them. It is, like I mentioned, it's quite the journey, and the warblers are neotropical. So again, they're coming from the tropics, South America, Central America, Mexico. A really fun fact about the warblers, most of them migrate at night. And that is because even though they can't see quite as well, there are less predators at night. And again, this journey is a long journey. It is exhausting. It takes a ton of energy. And to be able to do that requires them to be as efficient as possible. So doing it at night, avoiding predators, avoiding stress is great. But they have to be able to consume enough food to make it to their breeding grounds. So along the way, that's why we see so many warblers here in Ohio. They're having to stop to eat before they fly to their final nesting grounds in Canada. So we get a lot of them that maybe don't breed in Ohio, but they're traveling to Canada, and they stop here basically on the shortest section before they fly over Lake Erie to be able to refuel before they basically fly over what is essentially to them a freshwater ocean. So there are a lot of obstacles along the way, not just natural barriers, but a lot of man-made barriers. As you can see, this is an example of the Blackpool Warbler where they're flying from. Some of them very far, and they are going through a lot of urban areas where there's maybe not the ideal habitat for them to forage. So that is something to consider, that there is a lot of natural barriers, but there's also a lot of man-made barriers. Those oceans may be hard to fly, but sometimes flying through the city is worse. So our Blackpool Warbler. So they're pretty intense birds. Now, fall migration is a little bit different than spring migration. So these birds go both ways. They come from the tropics in the spring to breed up north, and then they go back to the tropics in the fall and winter because that's where they're able to find the best sources of food. Most of the warblers are insectivores, so they're eating insects. So they're not going to have much luck finding bugs here in Ohio come January. So they got to go somewhere where they can find some stuff. So an example of this intense migration, fall migration is a little bit different. They don't have to maintain those breeding colors. They don't need to stop over and get all that energy back as much because they're just in their drab fall colors and want to get straight to their wintering grounds as fast as possible. And a lot of times, rather than hopping along the land to get to their breeding grounds like they do in spring, they're going to go the most direct route, which means flying over the ocean. And they actually track some of these warblers, and one of the Blackpool Warblers, which you can see here in the springtime, did a non-stop flight, 72 hours of flying over 1,500 miles, and to get to the land. So, I mean, these birds weigh as much as a pencil. So before, it was pre-flight was 16 grams. And so they have to, when they land in their fall wintering grounds, they do not weigh 16 grams anymore. They have lost a lot of weight, a good portion of that weight. So they really, once they get in the fall, they have to refuel just like in springtime. So oftentimes in the fall, they're trying to get directly back to their wintering grounds, versus spring is they're going to take a little more time because they require more food. Because basically when they get to their breeding grounds, they got to breed, and you have to have good body condition to do that. In the fall, they just want to get back home and they can get food when they get there. So what's really neat about springtime is you get these big fallouts. So basically you get, these warblers are migrating at night, oftentimes in mixed flocks. So most of the time you're seeing a lot of different birds migrate all together at the same time. And you get these fallouts of these birds where basically they're coming and stopping at night, and you're having these huge flocks that are just so exhausted, whether it be weather or bad wind conditions, things like that, that they have to stop, and you get these crazy amount of birds. So at Seal Island, this is actually in right off the coast of Maine in New Brunswick. There's an island there, and they had a huge fallout of birds. So this is by the lighthouse on that island, and all the dots, the brownish dots on the ground, are warblers. So they have the crazy diversity of birds you can see in this picture. We see common yellowthroats, we see blackpolls, we see blackbirdians, we see magnolias, ovenbirds, American redstars. And so these are these mixed flocks. The weather was bad, so they had to stop, and they just all basically ended up hanging out on this island until the weather broke and they could continue their migration. A lot of times in Lake Erie Islands, we do get this happening, especially if the winds are really bad. If we're getting northeast winds, and we get a little bit of a tailwind instead of the headwind, you'll get all these birds, and if the weather switches, you get them all hanging out on islands waiting to get over to Canada. Kelly's Island gets them a lot, and then Peely Island in Canada is a really good place to see birds because they're basically island hopping across the lake if they can manage. So here's some more pictures of all these birds. It's literally just the island was littered with warblers. So it's really neat because we get to see this crazy migration of birds, and especially being around Lake Erie, like I mentioned, it's the shortest route, at least for those going on this side towards Ontario. They'll end up, we just get big collections of these birds because it's the easiest way across the lake. So as I mentioned, barriers and the hazards to migrations. Migrations are hazardous. It is a balance to stay somewhere year round and to migrate. And for warblers, because they're insectivores, they need to migrate. But a lot of the hazards they face right now is human based. Window strikes and lights from cities are some of the biggest. So remember, these birds migrate at night, and the lights actually can confuse them and disorient them when they're migrating. It increases the likelihood of them striking windows at night just because they can't, the reflections are messed up and whatnot. And then with the urbanization, they're losing stopover sites. So remember, in the springtime, these birds are going mostly by land because they have to maintain body condition. And with that, if humans are taking up most of the areas which they would stop, they don't have good habitat. If you think of cities, you're not thinking of it crawling, hopefully it's not crawling with insects that these birds are going to eat. because they need trees, they need woods. These are wood warblers. They glean insects off of things that are woody. So it makes it harder. Now, you also get humans have introduced predators, cats being one of them, dogs also are a big one as well, but we get the natural predators on top of it. And then the non-native species, cats in particular, are a big one. But with cities, house sparrows, you get things that can actually impact the warblers that breed in the area, maybe just outside of the city. They're getting the human-oriented non-native animals, such as the English house sparrow, that actually outcompete them and can even kill the fledglings, the hatchlings, and destroy the eggs. So humans do have a big impact on these birds, not just because of urbanization, but basically the chain of dominoes that comes with human habitat. So here's an example of migration flights, and it's superseded with the night view of both their wintering grounds and their breeding grounds. And you're seeing these flight paths are going straight through really urban areas, especially when you're looking towards the East Coast. So these birds have a lot of hazards and have to deal with just disorienting light pollution. So a big push is lights out. So reducing your light pollution during peak migration seasons when you can. I know it's not possible in all situations, but especially like basically April all the way through mid-May, if you can reduce your light pollution, that's really important. The Audubon Society has a lot of information about that, but turning lights out when you can not only saves energy, but can also help our migrating species. So that's just something to consider. Now, window strikes. Here at Maumee Bay, we have some fantastic picture windows that look over into the marsh, but the problem is one of our sides basically was a bird death trap. It was like almost every season, we literally had a freezer full of dead birds. We tried different methods to keep it from happening. We do the decals, we tried to do the strings, but the way the window was, it would just, when we have so much wind that we really had to find a different solution. We ended up having to basically, it looks like a giant, almost like a softball net, like or a baseball net that blocks this whole entire floor to ceiling window that we have. So if you're finding that you're having birds constantly hit certain areas, trying to reduce that is really, really important, because as you can see, the statistic kills 1 in 10 migratory birds if they actually hit the window, which can be, especially for some of our species, which are already have population issues and are at risk. That 10% of mortality from window strikes can make a difference whether or not the species can continue in the area that it's at. So reducing window strikes is really important. Nets work really well because the birds basically, they can see that it's a solid structure rather than the reflections and thinking they can fly through. And that doesn't help just our migratory birds, it helps our birds that are here full season as well. So it is good for everybody. And the net really doesn't even destroy the picture view, you can see just fine. So highly, highly recommend checking out and trying to do what you can to reduce mortality for our birds with windows. So this is a pretty sobering picture. This is from the 2010 migration in the city of Toronto. Toronto is a big stopover area. The birds are flying right across Lake Erie, and that's one of the most major cities they're going to hit right after they cross over Lake Erie. In 2017, the mortality, I believe, was 21,000 birds in the city of Toronto. So, and these are window strikes. These birds, and it's birds small and big. We have the American woodcock that has died. I see hawks on there. We have tons of warblers. You have songbirds. It's just, windows, it don't discriminate by size by any means. It can be our small migrants, and it can be our year-round predatory birds that are impacted by it as well. So window strikes, and especially in cities, make a big difference. So I know some cities are going through and trying to become more bird friendly. There's actually an organization in Toronto that was formed, it's called FLAP, and it's there basically to reduce bird mortality in the cities. So we are making a push, but just know that urbanization has really affected our migrant birds. And they also have to deal with predators. Cats being a big one of them. If you have cats, keep them inside if you can. They don't, oftentimes they kill prey, but they don't necessarily eat it. And cats have a longer lifespan if they stay inside. They're going to be less exposed to parasites and other instances of mortality, including being hit by cars. So it's better for the environment and the cats if they stay inside. But remember, these birds are nighttime migrants, so they still have to worry about some predators, including owls, and even our little screech owls can catch and kill our warblers, because the warblers are about the size, they're even a little bit smaller than the size of my fist. They are teeny tiny. So when they get to the breeding grounds and are breeding, they're going to be active during the day. They're going to be more diurnal, and so they have to worry about hawks at that point as well. So they still have the natural predators and the non-native predators to worry about, even after they've made it through the hazards of urban areas and window strikes. So on to identification. It can be a little bit tricky to identify the warblers. Some of them are really easy. You're like, there's no doubt in my mind, that's what that bird is, like the black-throated blue. It is a blue warbler with a black throat. However, you get some tricky ones in there as well. And oftentimes the females do not look like the males, and the females can look like other species. So we'll go on and kind of break down the identification for y'all. So where, when, where, what, why, and how. So is what we're going to go through. The when is the what time of year. These birds kind of come in waves. Some are early migrants, some are late migrants. So knowing the time of year and when you're seeing these birds is really important. The location of the bird. Northwest Ohio has different warblers than Southeast Ohio. We have some warblers that are in high counts in Southeast because they breed in the woods down there. And then we have our more northern birds that we can find in Northwest Ohio. Field marks, so the what you're looking at, are really important to identify the birds. Sometimes field marks are easier to see in some birds than others. And my favorite is why. Why am I trying to identify fall warblers? Fall warblers are hard. They're a challenge for me. They're a challenge for most even experienced birders. They don't have their breeding colors, so they look vastly different often than they do in the springtime. So it is difficult sometimes to identify those birds, but it's fun for a challenge round. And then how, the behavior of the bird, how are they acting? Because sometimes you can, like birds, I don't even have to see the color of the bird, just a silhouette, and I can tell you it's a palm warbler because of how it behaves. They bob their tail constantly, and I can see based on size and that tail bobbing, I know it's a palm. So when, time of year can really help you identify or at least narrow down what warblers you're seeing. So this is from Toronto, this is Ontario, and which is really relevant to here in Northwest Ohio because we're getting the Canadian birds. They're coming to go to Canada and they're coming through us. So you can see they actually did they did mist netting in a bird banding study, and you can see when they're seeing their peak of birds. So they're getting some birds as early as, early March. That's not, at least for the warblers, you're really not going to see them until early April. But they're getting almost waves. You can see that you're getting some a little earlier, and then it's going down. You're getting small waves of birds, and the peak is going to be that first and second week in May, just like it is here. They're more on the second week in May because they got to cross the lake. But the timing is really, really important. And the timing when you're looking for birds, now is the time you want to go out here, and next week as well. So knowing when you can see these birds is really important. So here are early migrants. So we get them as early as, like, I've seen the yellow-rumped warblers as early as April 1st. Probably they were here in March, but I didn't see them until April. And some birds come early to mid-April. Those are often more the southern warblers. So basically, southern Ohio gets the warblers before us because of geography. They're going to hit there first just because they have to fly further to go up north. And a lot of the southern warblers, some of the southern warblers breed there. So you're seeing warblers that are breeding in southern Ohio. They're not necessarily breeding up here in Northwest Ohio. But you get some ambitious and overzealous individuals. So basically they overshoot their breeding grounds, and we end up getting these warblers who normally aren't really found in high numbers here, just on like kind of their outliers. And we get them in early warbler season because they got a little too ambitious or they got caught in a tailwind and ended up getting too far north. So the worm-eating warbler is one of them. You're going to see them more on the first push. So late April is about when we start to see those worm-eating warblers, if we see them. They're very, very rare here in Northwest Ohio. The yellow-throated warbler. So the worm-eating warbler is the one in the middle that has all that fancy stripes. The yellow throat is not pictured, but we have the hooded warbler, which is going to be on the top right-hand side. And the Kentucky warbler isn't pictured as well. So we also have the black and white warbler. So if you see that we're looking at these pictures, one's a pretty easy one to guess. It's the one that's black and white in the bottom left. And the palm warbler, the one that I was talking about that I can identify just based on the silhouette, that one's going to be on the bottom right-hand side. And the one that I was saying that I see all the time really early is the yellow rump. And that's going to be the most common when we see at Maumee Bay is the yellow rump. That's the top left-hand side as well. But you get the pine and the yellow that come here, and these breed in this area. But our southern ones, which are denoted with the S, they're not breeding up here, but they're the ones that we see as an overshoot. So our first wave, which is what we're in right now, we're in the tail end of our first wave, tail to mid-end, late April to early May. So warbler migration is timeable, but it is very weather dependent. In particular, in this region, it is wind dependent. We get a lot of nor'easters this time of year, and when you weigh as much as a pencil and trying to fly into 30-mile-per-hour headwinds, doesn't work out very well. So sometimes we get a little bit of a delay in our warbler migration. I can't remember if it was 2 or 3 years ago, we were almost a week delayed because we have such a strong wave of northeast winds. So it kept the birds at bay, and all of a sudden we got a huge amount of warblers. So my favorite, I love these guys, the black-throated blue. As you can see, it's the blue warbler with the black throat. They almost look like they're wearing that black mask. They're going to be in the first wave. You also get the black-throated green, which you see that black throat. He's more yellow than green, but he has that olive on the black back there. They have a very distinctive call that you can really pick out pretty easily. It's a buzzy call, almost mechanical sounding. One of the really bright warblers that we have here that's just, they're beautiful, is a Blackberry and Warbler. That's going to be on the top left hand. They almost look like they have a flame colored throat. They're beautiful. Cape May is going to be on the bottom right hand side, and the well-named chestnut-sided warbler is right in the middle. And these are all birds that you can see towards the beginning of migration. Our second wave, midway, you're usually seeing them during the second week of the migration. So you're seeing them towards like the 10th. Again, very wind dependent. Sometimes they come later, almost towards the 3rd week of May, just depending on the wind. You have the bay-breasted warbler, which is going to be on the top right-hand side, the Magnolia, which is on the top left, the Blackpool, which can be tricky, and we'll go into that later. The female Blackpool and the female black and white can be a little bit of a tricky one to identify, but that's going to be on the bottom left-hand side. Wilson's warbler, which looks like he's wearing a little beret. He's on the bottom right. And then the American redstart, which kind of can be confused with a red-winged blackbird. However, the American redstart is substantially smaller and doesn't move the same way. But these guys are really cool. They have these nice flashy orange-ish, yellowish patches with a little bit of red. So our third wave, our later warblers, they can come all the way through until June on occasion. You get the morning warbler. So the morning warbler is going to be down on the bottom left. It has that dark bib. The Connecticut warbler has that eye ring on the bottom right. You get, again, our Wilson's warbler. So remember him from last time wearing the beret. He can sometimes be a later migrant as well. The Canada warbler, which, as you can imagine, is breeding up in Canada. They're going to be on the top left hand, and then our American redstart can be one of our later ones as well. So where? Again, in terms of geography, knowing what birds you might see based on the region is really important. We are very unlikely to see birds like the Kentucky warbler up, basically, we're almost in Canada. So we're not as likely to see the Kentucky warbler as they are in Southern Ohio, which is Kentucky warbler might imply that you might find them in Kentucky. So that's just something to consider is where. So here's our Northern Ohio birds. These are birds that we're seeing in Northern Ohio. You're not as likely to see them in Southern Ohio as you are in Northern Ohio. So we have our mourning warbler, which is going to have that deep bib down there. So the bottom left-hand side, our Connecticut has that eye ring. The mourning's bottom right, Connecticut's top left. Our golden wing warbler, these guys are really, really rare to see, but they are found in Northern Ohio. They're going to have that one that's in the bottom left that has that golden kind of wing bar there. Our Kirkland warbler, this is one that people go crazy for. They actually breed in the Jack Pine region in Michigan, but occasionally we get some that try to breed here, and they are very, very rare, even in this region, even though this is the region they live in. So these are really, really cool ones to see. We've had a couple here in the park, and they actually had one singing. So oftentimes, if they don't breed in the area, you're not going to hear them singing, but we actually have had a singing Kirkland warbler. The Kirkland warbler is going to be the top right-hand one. And then, of course, our Canada warbler with that nice black necklace in the middle. So here's some statistics of the difference between the likelihood that you are to see these birds. So the golden wing warbler, so in that pink is going to be Lucas and Ottawa County, that more lavender, not really pink, but those the lavender bars are going to show you the rate of incidence that we're seeing these birds. The yellow bar is going to be basically how you find them statewide, the amount of percentage statewide, and the magenta is going to be Southern Ohio. So you can see some of these birds don't even blip on the Southern Ohio. You might see them statewide, you'll see them mid-state on occasion, but these birds are pretty heavily found in Northwest Ohio. But on the opposite end, you're finding birds that have a lot higher incident in Southern Ohio. So the blue wing warbler, which I was very fortunate to hear recently, I went down to John Bryan State Park and I was able to hear them there. That one is going to be the bottom right-hand side. The worm-eating warbler, like I mentioned, is very, very rare in Northwest Ohio. It's really only a southern overshoot. That one's going to be the top right. The Louisiana water thrush, which we get on occasion in Northwest Ohio, very rare occasion. Make it tricky to identify because we do have a northern water thrush, but that's going to be on the top left. The Kentucky warbler, which is going to be in the bottom left, is very prevalent in Southern Ohio. And then the yellow throat, again, well-named warbler, has that yellow throat right in the middle. And you can see the difference between how much you find them in Northwest Ohio versus how much you find them in Southern Ohio. If you look, they do kind of pop up in Northwest Ohio, and these are because they're the birds that got way too ambitious and overshot their breeding grounds. And that's really the only reason why we're getting these birds. So as you can see, it's more on the earlier end because they may be younger migrants. The first time they're migrating, got too ambitious or got trapped up in a windstorm. But these birds are much, 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 much more likely to be found in Southern Ohio. What? So we talked about the where, we were going to talk about the what and the description of the birds. So is really vital into determining what species we're seeing and can help us narrow down what we're looking at as well. So field markings, they're great. It can get complicated, but this one's a color-coded one. You can see all the different places you can look and all the different names for the specific regions of the birds. But having the field marks or getting your best guess of field marks is really important to differentiate between species. Some species may look very similar, but the beak or the feet are different colors. And that can really help us narrow it down. And you want to use the field marks with the combination of the time of year. Identifying birds is basically a buildup. You need to know when, what, why, and how for these birds. And especially if you're just getting started out, simpler is better. So this is kind of complicated. It is color-coded, but here's a little bit lower, a little bit more a simplified one. The rump, the nape, the crown, and the breast are going to be really, really important for a lot of the warblers. The big field marks are on there. However, the legs can come into play too, but all of these are really important, just a general region of what you're looking at and what's on that region. I like to use the 4-zone, head, shoulders, knees, and tails. So toes, just when we're looking at the birds kind of based on what you're seeing, just the general field marks in that area. Silhouettes are also something to be considered. We have, like I mentioned, it's not just the warblers that are migrating right now. You're having thrushes. You're having, we're seeing different wrens. We're seeing gnatcatchers. We're seeing a whole bunch of different types of birds. And these silhouettes kind of give you a general idea of the shape of the bird and can kind of help you eliminate, am I looking at a gnatcatcher, which always looks like they're hunched up and it looks like they need to go to the chiropractor, versus the wren, which is always seen at an angle and they look very angular. They have their tails usually up. Thrushes are often found on the ground. They're bigger, they're bulkier. Think of a robin when you're thinking of thrushes. And then we can look at color impressions, just the general colors of what we're seeing. And as I mentioned, warblers like to give you burger's neck, make you hurt your neck there. You're oftentimes looking at their tails. And so the tail pattern can be important as well. I like these, they kind of really simplify the birds in terms of what you're looking at for general facial features. So these really help us distinguish, okay, they're over exaggerated, but can really give us a quick, like, okay, this is what I saw. This is probably what the bird is, or at least I can narrow it down that, hey, I saw something I saw it looked like it almost had an eyebrow. I can narrow it down, or it looked like an extension of this beak. The lines continue through the eye. So it can look at maybe blue-wing, black-throated green, prairie, things like that. So that can just kind of help us narrow down what we're seeing. There's the Warbler Guide has great, it's a great resource. They provide multiple. So this is the side view quick finder. This is the ideal way you'll see a warbler. However, it is not often the way you'll see one. So they do side, they do the 45-degree, which is mostly how I see the warblers, kind of give you an idea of what birds you're seeing. And then they do the under view, which is often how you'll see these birds. You're looking at their tails and you're looking at their bellies. So this can help you kind of narrow down what you're seeing as well. And here's a quick kind of differentiating between the tails. Some birds have longer tails than others. Some birds have patterns on their tails. Oftentimes they're kind of having that very bland looking tail, but it can at least kind of narrow down what you're seeing. So we're going to go on to commonly confused species. The 3 Ps, pine, prairie, and palm. So they're in order: pines left, prairies in the middle, palms on the right-hand side. These birds are going to be streaky and they're going to be generally yellow. The palm is going to be one of our early ones. They have, but pine and prairie are early as well. The palm have this chestnut colored crown, and the palms are tail bobbers. So they're going to be bobbing their tail constantly. So it makes it a little easier to identify between the two. The prairie in the middle is going to have a lot more extensive streaking. The pine doesn't really have much streaking. They're going to have like almost like an ombre look overall. They're kind of blend together versus having streaks available. The palm is going to have a much more brown gray look to it versus the pine, who's going to have a very yellow look to it. And the prairie is kind of in the middle. But the prairie has some pretty obvious streaking on its sides and on its face. Nashville, Connecticut, and Morning. So the Nashville and Connecticut warblers are both going to have this eye ring. However, the Nashville on the left-hand side is going to have a yellow throat. The Nashville is going to be statistically way more likely the bird that you're seeing. Nashvilles are early. Connecticut's and Mornings can be late. The Connecticut and Morning can look very, very similar. They have a darker bib. However, the Morning is going to be much later and it's going to have a very, very dark bib. And it's not going to have that eye ring. And it's going to almost look like it's wearing way too much eyeliner. It has a very, very dark face and it has a dark throat. So the Morning's on the right-hand side, Connecticut's in the middle, and Nashville's on the left-hand side. Nashvilles are very common. They're very cool birds. That's the one that you're most likely going to see of all these warblers. Yellow rumps, yellow-throated, Magnolia in Canada. So yellow rumped, left-hand side, Magnolia, right-hand side, yellow-throated, top middle, Canada, bottom middle. These are going to be black, gray, white, yellow birds. Yellow-throated, we're not as likely to see here in Northwest Ohio. The yellow rumps is going to be, especially in the early part of migration, you're going to see tons and tons and tons and tons of these guys. They're going to have a white throat. That's going to be the biggest distinguishing feature of all of these. They do not have a full eye ring. They have a white throat. The yellow-throated is going to have that yellow throat. It's going to have a white eyebrow, which the only other one that has the white eyebrow besides the yellow rump is going to be that Magnolia. The Magnolia, however, has extensive streaking on its breast and sides, and the yellow carries through. So the yellow-throated has a yellow throat, white breast. Magnolia has yellow throat and yellow carries through to the breast. The Canada doesn't really have a whole bunch of white on it, doesn't have any wing bars, not a lot of streaking, and it's going to have that white eye ring and yellow throughout, and the yellow goes into the face where it doesn't, the other birds lack that. So yellow rumped and Magnolia of the two, the ones that you're more likely to see, yellow rumped earlier, Magnolia more towards the second week in May. Cerulean, which I wish they were more common here in Northwest Ohio. Those are Southern Ohio breeders. We do get them up here in Northwest, not very common. Black-throated blue, last year we had a great migration of those, but we usually get quite a few of those, and then the Northern Parula. So these are going to be relatively heavily blue birds. The Cerulean is going to be blue and white. That's going to be the distinguishing factor in those. It's just really blue and white with some black wing barring, but not really any bold black. The black-throated blue is going to have that bold black, blue, and white look to it, versus the Northern Parula, which will have yellow and rust color and a little bit of orange on it, a little bit of olive on it as well. So these birds are primarily blue, but they are pretty easy to distinguish unless you're getting a really quick glance at them. The chestnut-sided and the golden wing, especially if you're really only seeing its face, they're going to have that yellow on the crown, and they're going to have that kind of V-shaped, backwards V-shaped mask. However, the golden wing has a black throat versus the chestnut-sided has a yellow throat. And of the two, you are substantially more likely to see the chestnut-sided than the golden wing. Black and white and Blackpool. These birds are both black and white. The Blackpool has a cap. So Blackpool is going to be on that right-hand side. He has a cap. He also does not have a dark beak, and he does not have dark legs. He's going to have a lot more white to him versus the black and white looks like almost like a zebra bird. They have lots of streaking, black and white, heavily black and white. And when we talk about female warblers, you'll see they're a little bit harder to distinguish as females, but they're going to be black and white, with the black and white warbler being extensively streaked. Two of my favorites, the Prothonotary and the blue-winged. They look similar. We're seeing the Prothonotary. We are very, very unlikely to see the blue-winged up here. The Prothonotary is a swamp bird. They're called the swamp candles. So they are very common here. They actually breed here. They're one of the only cavity nesting warblers. So they're they'll nest in wood duck boxes. They'll nest in cavities in the trees. So they are really cool to see. They have just this beautiful blended look going from bright yellow all the way down through gray. The blue-winged is going to have the wing bars. They're not going to have as a smooth transition, and they're going to have that streak through that eye, that black. It almost looks like their beak extends through their eye. Much more common in Southern Ohio than Northwest Ohio. Wilsons and yellow. Yellow birds. Especially if you're looking really only underneath them, they're just going to look like this yellowish bird. The Wilsons has that beret versus the yellow warbler is yellow, but the males have this kind of ruby streaking through their breasts. So looking, especially if you're seeing a male yellow warbler versus a Wilson's, you'll be able to distinguish even if you're just looking at their bellies. But the female yellow does not have that yellow streaking, so it can get a little confusing. So Tennessee and orange crowned. They basically are kind of no real distinct colors on them. The Tennessee is going to be more gray and more olive overall versus the orange crown, which is kind of just like a muted yellow. The Tennessee and orange crown are both we kind of find them about the same time, but the Tennessee is going to have, you're going to look for that more whitish throat and a little more grayish crown. But they're kind of muted colors, kind of little brown birds or little yellowish birds rather than some of the other warblers, which have some pretty distinct field marks. Hooded and black-throated green. If you're just looking at their bellies, both are going to have those black throats. However, the black-throated green is going to have a white belly with streaking versus a all yellow belly for the hooded. The black-throated green is actually, so I did them backwards. Black-throated green is on the left-hand side, hooded's on the right-hand side. The black-throated green is going to have wing barring, which the hooded lacks, but they're going to have a overall feel of black and yellow. Kentucky and the common yellow throat, they kind of look like they're wearing masks. They have a heavy black presence on the head. However, the Kentucky Warbler is going to have yellow around the eye. The common yellow throat, very common here in Northwest Ohio and especially around Maumee Bay. They look like they have that raccoon mask. They're little bandits. They have kind of a white unibrow on top and that black mask and a distinctly yellow throat. And the common yellow throat is going to be more brown overall, which is that really distinct face. Versus the Kentucky is kind of wash of yellow throughout. American redstart and Blackberry, they're going to be one of the birds that are orange and black. Not many warblers are, at least here in Northwest Ohio, they're more yellow than the orange, and the black is not as bold as it is like the American redstart, but these birds are pretty distinctly orange and black. The Blackberry has the orange face and the yellow face and the flame colored throat versus the American redstart, which is going to have those, it's patchy versus the very, very intense face of Blackberry. Bay-breasted and Cape May can be hard if the lighting's not right. They act very similar, and if you're in poor lighting, they can actually look pretty similar. However, the bay-breasted is going to have that bay chestnut down its side and throat and crown versus the Cape May, which is going to have an overall yellow feel to it. Worm-eating warbler, and then we have the red-eyed vireo. So there are other birds that are migrating that look kind of similar to warblers. They have a much thicker bill. They're about the same size though, the vireos, and they can be kind of hard to distinguish. So the worm-eating warbler is going to have a very pointy beak. It's going to look a little more delicate and has these nice streaking on the crown and face. However, it's going to be kind of a yellow wash. Versus the red-eyed vireo, it's going to have that streaking. It's not as bold, or the red-eyed vireo, excuse me, is not as bold. That streaking on the face is not as distinct as the worm-eating vireo. Has a much thicker bill and it's going to have dark legs. And actually, their eyes do look red. This picture is just the eyes very dark, but they have a red cast to it. So you have the northern water thrush and the Louisiana water thrush. Which can be very hard to distinguish. The northern water thrush is going to be on the right-hand side versus the Louisiana on the left-hand side. We can find them both here in Northwest Ohio, not super commonly. However, the northern water thrush is going to have streaking on its throat and a buffy overall feel versus the Louisiana water thrush, which will have a white throat. And streaking on the throat doesn't automatically mean it's a northern water thrush, not a Louisiana water thrush, but if it has a white throat, it is not a northern. Some Louisiana water thrushes can have a little bit of streaking on their throat, but northerns are always going to have a streaked throat. Location is really important for these. Northwest Ohio is getting the northern. Southern Ohio is getting the Louisiana water thrush. Ovenbird is kind of a weird one. They look like a miniature thrush. They are a warbler. They are often found on the ground. They kind of look and behave a little bit like thrushes, but these guys are warblers. they're going to be substantially smaller than any of the thrushes. So if you see a little tiny bird on the ground, looks like a miniature thrush, you're looking at the ovenbird. Female warblers, much harder to identify immediately. Oftentimes, this word pictured here is a female American redstart. In person, these guys are gorgeous. They look different than the male redstart, clearly, but they are very handsome on their own. They're not going to be as vocal. They're going to be more secretive. These guys are the breeders. They're the ones sitting on the nest. So they got to blend in a little bit more. They don't want to be a sitting duck. They're going to often have more muted colors with better camouflage. So here's the male and American female, the male and female American redstart. Same colors, just basically less saturated. The northern parula, the male and female. The female, again, just basically looks like a less saturated version of the northern parula and can kind of be confused with the Nashville warbler, the male Nashville. Now, as when I mentioned the Blackpools, the female black and white warbler almost looks like she has a cap, which can get her confused with the Blackpool warbler. She doesn't have nearly the amount of streaking. So we're looking at that male warbler, a little bit pretty easy to identify the difference between the male Blackpool and the male black and white, but the female can be tricky. As we're looking, there's the male Blackpool, and again, here's that female black and white. If you're just getting a glance, they can be confused. However, the feet are the big story in that. Black and white warblers have dark feet. So the female Blackpool warbler can get confused with sparrows. She's going to be a little bit smaller, behave differently than most sparrows, but as you can see, the male and female look vastly different. The male common yellowthroat looks different from the female common yellowthroat. The female common yellowthroat looks like the orange crowns. So female warblers can be tricky. Behavior is a big one, and a male warbler being present in the general area also can help you identify if it's the female one or the other. The male Wilson's pretty easy to distinguish between the yellow warbler, but the female gets tricky. So she has a little bit of black on her, but when we do the yellow, the female yellow warbler doesn't really have any streaking, so she can be confused with the female Wilson's warbler over here. The female yellow warbler is going to have more brown on her wings, but if you're just getting that quick glance, it can be confusing. The male has that ruby necklace on his breast. Black throated blue, the female looks nothing like the male. She's got to be a lot more camouflaged, and she kind of just can maybe be confused even with the Tennessee warbler. And the fall warblers, you think the females are hard, the fall warblers are fun if you like challenge. So fall warblers, they all kind of turn into little brownish yellow birds. They do not have the distinct field marks that the breeding plumages give you. They don't need that anymore. They're done breeding. They don't need to waste the energy on getting those pretty feather colors. So they are going to just be a lot less vibrant. So these are actually two different species of warbler. We have the bay-breasted and we have the Blackpool. The Blackpool is going to have that yellow feet versus the bay-breasted is going to have the darker feet. So they can be really, really difficult in the fall to distinguish. They're two separate species. And if you don't get a good look, and fall, we still have a lot of leaves out. It's hard to be able to see these birds very clearly. So bird in hand is a little bit easier to identify than bird in the field, but it can be tricky to identify these two. So again, here's our bay-breasted warbler on the top and the Blackpool on the bottom. And you can see the Blackpool has those light colored feet, but just looking at them in foliage, it's going to be hard to distinguish between the two. So fall warblers are hard. So some helpful hints when you're doing warblers, whether it be spring or fall, take pictures, even if it's not the best picture, but you're getting part of the bird, it can really help you when you're looking at field marks later on. Using a field guide, I use, especially with fall warblers, use a field guide. And then a really great resource is checking eBird. They can kind of tell you what people are seeing in the area, so you can tell if like, am I way out of the likelihood of seeing this bird, because sometimes we get birds that are not supposed to be in this region. Last year we had a Townsend Warbler, which is a it's a Western Warbler. So depending on the weather, we might get some warblers that are not supposed to be here, but you might be seeing something that's not supposed to be in this region. And if other people are seeing it as well and have good pictures, you might be able to confirm that you saw something that's pretty cool. eBird is awesome. So it's the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. It's basically group citizen science. People can say what they're seeing in the region, and basically almost like you can look at checklists that people had that different days. So you can kind of go through and see what people are seeing and match up to maybe what you're seeing as well. These are some great resources. Cornell Lab of Ornithology also has an app called Merlin Bird Id. Highly recommend it. It does take up a lot of space on your phone, but the great part is once you download it, it does not require data to use. So you can go in areas that have no cell phone reception. You can still look at pictures of the bird. You can look at the range map, and you can hear its calls as well, which can be really, really helpful, especially when you're trying to distinguish between species. The Warbler Guide, great book. Ken Kaufman has amazing field guides. There's a lot of different books you can get. The state, the Division of Wildlife, has a really nice, really good, almost like, it's not quite a pocket guide, but it is a really great book. It's called Warblers of Ohio. Ooh, there we go, get it on camera. And it is paper copy, but they have the different warblers that breed in Ohio, talking about the timing that you'll see it, pictures of them, the habitats they live in, and it actually does the abundance. They have an abundance map here that you can see when you're most likely to see these birds, what region they're found in, and things like that. They actually have print publications available, but the best part is they have it available online as PDFs. So you can get it even if you can't get a print copy, you can still find it online, which is wonderful. They have a whole bunch of different guides, not just birds, they have trees, they have dragonflies, they have spiders, they have wonderful resource. Another good one is the Common Birds of Ohio, has some of our migrants, but as well as birds that we see year round. So when you're out looking for warblers, you'll see a lot of different birds. So having both of these is a really great resource to have. And I know I talked a lot. Do we have any questions?
I did ask both Julie and Liesl to unmute. So if you see that prompt pop up, you can go ahead and unmute yourselves if you have any questions.
I don't have a question. I just wanted to tell you that it was really interesting. And it was a lot of information. I should be up there this weekend for the greatest week of birding or whatever it's called, but obviously I'm not there. But this was good, and I hope it'll be saved so that I can go back and try to digest it again. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you.
Yes, Liesl, this will be posted on our YouTube channel later this afternoon, so you can go back and watch it as many times as you want.
I would need probably 1,000.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Lauren,
Absolutely.
for giving us this program, and we'll see you again in June. And thank you again, everyone, for joining us.
Perfect.
Have a great day.
Yeah, if you guys have any questions, my email's there, and thank you so much for joining me.
Great.
Thank you.